The ocean can turn from calm to deadly in an instant, hiding predators capable of unimaginable power. From the Vargas family's luxury yacht being rammed by a 20-foot great white off southern Australia, to adventure blogger Sam's kayak being violently flipped by a lightning-fast short-fin meko off New Zealand. In this video, you'll witness 6 terrifying encounters with sharks. On February 21, 2004, the waters off Gansby, South Africa, glistened under the bright summer sun as the Muller family prepared for what they believed would be the adventure of a lifetime, with Stefan and Annika eager to share the beauty of the reefs with their 10-year-old son Lucas, while their close friends Marco and Sofia, who had traveled with them, adjusted their rented underwater scooters with a sense of childlike excitement at the thought of gliding among the corals and fish in one of the most famous marine environments in the world, completely unaware of the terror that waited silently below the surface near the seal colony where the apex predators of the region patrolled. The family descended together into the turquoise water, their scooters humming softly as they glided above the reefs. Schools of fish flashed in sudden bursts of silver around them. Lucas gripped his handles tightly, torn between nerves and excitement, while his parents stayed close and their family friends swam just ahead, laughter bubbling through their regulators. Carried by the thrill of discovery, none of them noticed the shadow circling with slow, powerful intent in the deeper blue beyond. Unseen by them, an 18-foot great white shark had been moving steadily along the edge of the seal colony, its powerful body gliding with minimal effort, its movements efficient and its senses tuned to every vibration and shift in the water. And when the sound of the scooters entered its range, the predator turned with instinctive focus, investigating the strange buzzing presence that intruded into its hunting ground, its black eyes fixed on the vibrations produced by the unfamiliar machines. Stefan, who had taken the lead, guided his scooter toward a deeper section of reef, glancing back at Annika and Lucas to reassure them with a wave of his hand, while Marco and Sofia adjusted their depth slightly above. And in that moment, the shadow surged forward with sudden explosive force, its massive jaws opening wide in a terrifying white arc, before clamping down directly onto Stefan's scooter and his lower body with a violent crash that sent shockwaves through the water and knocked the machine off balance, dragging him downward with unstoppable momentum as blood erupted into the clear water. Annika's scream never reached the surface, muffled by her regulator, but her frantic movements conveyed her horror as she turned her scooter directly toward the swirling chaos where Stefan's body disappeared in a cloud of red. And Lucas, panicked and desperate, followed her, both of them driving their machines against the side of the shark in a silent, frantic attempt to force it away from Stefan. But the predator reacted instantly to the pressure, thrashing with devastating force, its massive head jerking violently as its teeth tore Stefan apart in a brutal frenzy. The water around them turned into a storm of bubbles, thrashing tails and spreading blood as Annika struck again with her scooter, her motherly instinct overwhelming fear as she tried to save her husband. But in that violent instant, the shark shifted and lunged sideways, its jaws closing across her torso in a spray of bubbles and blood, crushing and tearing her with a horrifying efficiency that left her broken body drifting only feet away from her terrified son, whose own frantic attempts to ram the predator with his scooter made him the next target. The shark twisted in the water with terrifying speed for such a massive animal, its body curving and striking with precision. And its jaws found Lucas as the boy tried to back away, the impact sending his small body into the spreading cloud of red, with deep wounds that left him fatally injured, even as his scooter spun away and drifted helplessly toward the surface, the bright machine useless against the relentless force of the apex predator. Marco and Sofia, who had been just behind, froze for a single paralyzing instant as the nightmare unfolded before them, then surged into action with desperate energy, splashing, banging their scooters, and striking the water with equipment in a frantic attempt to draw the predator's attention away. Their movements frantic and filled with the knowledge that a wrong move could make them the next victims, while the massive shark twisted once more in the blood-clouded water before finally turning away and retreating with slow, deliberate strokes of its tail, disappearing back toward the deeper blue near the seal colony as suddenly as it had arrived. The water stilled gradually after the violent chaos, but the sight was unbearable as the remains of Stefan and Annika drifted below the surface, their blood mixing with the currents, while Lucas floated motionless nearby, his small body marked by wounds that no rescue could have reversed. And Marco and Sofia, shaken beyond words, clung to their scooters and tried to gather themselves enough to rise toward the boats above, their limbs trembling as the reality of what they had witnessed crashed over them with merciless weight. When rescue crews finally arrived minutes later in response to frantic surface calls, they could do little but retrieve the broken bodies from the water, their faces pale as they confronted the aftermath of one of the most horrifying shark attacks recorded in recent memory. Marco and Sofia stood on deck in stunned silence, their wetsuits streaked with salt water and blood, their expressions hollow and uncomprehending as they replayed the images again and again in their minds, trapped in the horror of what they had just survived. In the days that followed, experts explained to a shaken public that the Muller family had encountered one of the ocean's most efficient predators in its natural hunting ground, and that the silent, desperate interventions of Annika and Lucas, though born of love and courage, had only heightened the danger, because any sudden pressure or frantic movement in the presence of an apex predator could provoke fatal strikes, particularly in waters so close to a seal colony where hunger and instinct sharpened every reaction, leaving little chance of survival once the first attack had begun. The tragedy served as a grim reminder that in predator-rich waters such as those off Gansbai, where great whites rule with unmatched power, human presence is tolerated only until instinct awakens. And when it does, the ocean becomes a place where even the strongest resolve and the deepest love can vanish in moments under the crushing force of nature's most efficient killer. On March 3, 2007, the Arctic Ocean stretched in every direction as an endless sheet of ice and water, a place where few people had ever traveled so deep. Far below the frozen surface, marine researcher Dr. Lena Fisher guided a small submersible into the dark world more than 1,000 feet down, where the sunlight never reached and where strange creatures moved through the cold in silence. She had spent years preparing for this dive, studying Greenland sharks and the mysterious forms of life that survived in the crushing pressure of the deep, and as the metal craft sank lower, its lights cut through the blackness, catching the pale movements of fish and the drifting shapes of jelly-like organisms that pulsed slowly in the heavy water, each new sight filling her with both wonder and caution. The submersible's hum was steady as she adjusted its course, recording images of small Arctic cod that darted in schools and strange bottom creatures crawling across the silty floor. And for long minutes, the dive unfolded with the calm rhythm of observation, her focus sharp as she guided the vehicle carefully through the narrow spaces between rocky slopes and ridges that had been untouched for thousands of years. Yet deep below, sound carried far in the water, and the vibrations of the submersible drew the attention of something larger, a shadow that had been moving slowly along the bottom with the heavy, deliberate rhythm of an animal that did not need speed to dominate its world. And when it turned toward the light, the size of its head alone made the small craft seem fragile. It came into view without warning, an 18-foot Greenland shark, its pale skin mottled with scars, its body massive and thick, its movements heavy yet purposeful, its mouth slightly open to reveal rows of small but powerful teeth. And in the silence of the deep, the slow glide of the predator was overwhelming, as if the weight of the ocean itself had taken form. Lena's pulse quickened as she held the controls steady, her eyes locked on the massive figure that moved closer, drawn by the strange light that cut through the black water. And for a moment, she tried to measure its behavior, remembering that Greenland sharks lived for centuries and moved with a pace that often seemed lazy, but could turn into sudden action when curiosity or hunger demanded it. The animal circled with unsettling patience, its tail sweeping slowly from side to side, its head angling toward the submersible as though testing this new arrival in its ancient world. And then, without warning, it lunged forward, the enormous head striking close enough that its teeth scraped across the metal hull with a sound that carried through the small cabin, sharp and grating, leaving deep white scratches across the submersible's surface. The force of the impact shook the craft, and Lena gripped the controls tightly, her heart hammering as she backed away slowly, careful not to make any sudden movement that might provoke another strike, all while the shark turned again, its eyes black and expressionless as it passed through the light, its mouth hanging slightly open in the way that revealed both its age and its strength. The minutes dragged as the predator circled, at times gliding so near that its massive body filled the viewing window, then slipping back into the dark just far enough to remind her it could vanish and return at will. Every shift of the submersible seemed watched and weighed, the animal probing the thin line between curiosity and instinct. Her hands shook as she adjusted the thrusters, guiding the craft to maintain distance while her cameras recorded every detail. Because even as fear gripped her, she knew the value of capturing the encounter. Proof of just how powerful and unpredictable these Arctic predators could be, especially at depths where their slow movements concealed a strength greater than many imagined. The scratches across the hull stood as a warning, deep marks cut by what seemed like only a brief graze. And she could not forget that if the shark chose to press harder, the metal might not withstand repeated bites, because even though the teeth were not large like those of a great white, their grip and pressure could be devastating against a target that had no chance of escape in this heavy water. The circling continued for several long minutes, time stretching until each second felt like an hour. Her body tense and her breathing uneven as she waited for the predator to make another move. But finally, the shark turned with a slow sweep of its tail and faded back into the black water, disappearing beyond the reach of the lights, as though it had simply lost interest, leaving behind silence and the fading pulse of her fear. For a long moment she sat frozen, staring at the empty darkness where the shadow had been, and only then did she realize how hard her body trembled, the adrenaline still rushing through her as she guided the submersible upward, her mind replaying the image of those jaws scraping the hull, and the feeling that at any second it could have returned with greater force. When she reached the surface and was pulled back aboard the research vessel, her craft showed the scars of the encounter, white gouges etched along the hull like reminders of just how close she had come. And though she was unharmed, she knew she had seen the immense strength of a predator whose slow and ancient rhythm could disguise the ability to strike with sudden power. Experts who later studied the footage explained that Greenland sharks, though not known for aggressive hunting of humans, were curious creatures drawn by light, sound, and vibration. And their slow pace did not mean safety for anything in their path, because even a cautious exploratory bite carried enough force to threaten the integrity of a submersible in those crushing depths, where escape was almost impossible. The encounter left Lena shaken but also deeply aware of the reality of the Arctic's hidden predators. For in that place where the ocean pressed down with unrelenting weight and silence, survival belonged not to the craft of humans, but to the creatures that had ruled the depths for centuries. And the scratches carved across her vessel would remain as permanent evidence of the nightmarish strength that lingered far below the ice. It was December 14, 2011, as the summer sun burned bright over the Coral Sea, and the wind swept hard across the surface near Queensland, Australia, where adventure enthusiast Jake Palmer rode his windsurf board with the confidence of years spent mastering balance and speed, his sail catching the gusts as he carved sharp turns and let the spray rise around him in bursts that shimmered in the light. The water beneath him was a clear mix of turquoise and dark patches, the shallows giving way to deeper channels, and Jake reveled in the freedom of moving so fast over the swells, his body leaning and shifting with practiced rhythm as each gust pushed him forward, the board slicing through the sea with a hiss that matched the pounding of his heart as he gave himself fully to the ride. What he could not see was the slow, steady shape that moved in the water below, a 12-foot tiger shark that had been patrolling the area in search of food, its senses tuned to the vibrations of the sea, its body swaying with the deliberate power of a predator that had no rivals in its environment. And when the sound of splashing reached it, the shark shifted course and angled upward with sudden interest. Jake leaned into a tight turn, dragging the edge of his board across the water in a sharp curve, the spray erupting into the air in a glittering arc. But as he did, the shadow below surged with terrifying precision, the shark lunging upward in a burst of speed that seemed impossible for such a heavy body, its jaws opening wide before clamping down hard on the rear corner of his windsurf board. The force of the strike sent a shock through the board and up into Jake's legs, jerking the entire rig sideways with violent force. And in that instant, his calf brushed against the rough edge of the predator's mouth, the teeth grazing his skin and cutting through his wetsuit in shallow lines that burned with sudden pain as blood rose into the water in faint red streaks that swirled away in the current. The violent jolt nearly threw him off balance, his body swinging over the board as the sail twisted and caught the wind unevenly. And for one terrifying second he thought he would crash into the water with the predator still below. But his reflexes took over as he kicked hard with his free leg, shifting his weight back and fighting to stay upright even as the shark's heavy body thrashed beneath him. The wind whipped against the sail and Jake clung to the boom with desperate strength, his muscles straining as he forced the board back under control. But the predator was not gone, circling below in a wide loop that brought its massive body back toward him, its striped skin flashing briefly in the light as it passed, its jaws still opening and closing in slow tests, as if trying to decide whether this strange object was prey worth striking again. Jake's breath came fast and shallow, his chest tight as he kept his balance, trying not to let the board tip or slow too much, because the water felt endless around him, the horizon wide and empty, and though land was visible in the distance, it seemed far away when measured against the power of the animal that circled only feet below, waiting for weakness. The shark came close again, brushing the underside of the board with the hard edge of its head, sending another shock through Jake's body and reminding him that one slip could put him directly into its reach. And he fought back waves of panic as he kept his body steady, knowing that splashing too wildly might draw another strike, and that his only hope was to stay in control long enough for the predator to lose interest. Seconds stretched into long, grinding moments as the tiger shark circled, sometimes fading into the gloom just far enough that Jake could not see it, then sliding back into view with a slow curve of its tail. And each time he caught a glimpse of its stripes and blunt head, his stomach tightened and his grip on the boom grew tighter. The silence of the encounter broken only by the wind and the slap of water against the board. At last, the predator shifted course, its heavy body angling downward as though the brief taste of fiberglass and blood had not convinced it to attack further. And with slow, deliberate strokes of its tail, it slipped back into deeper water, leaving Jake trembling and soaked in adrenaline, his body tense and his mind still caught in the certainty that at any moment it could have risen again to finish what it had started. He rode the board back toward the shore with unsteady control, each gust of wind carrying him closer to the safety of the beach. But the sting in his calf and the scuff marks along the edge of the board reminded him with every shift that he had been within seconds of being pulled under. When he finally stumbled onto the sand, he collapsed onto his knees, the waves rushing past his feet as he tried to steady his breathing. The wetsuit was torn along his lower leg, shallow cuts lining his calf where the shark's teeth had grazed him. And though the wounds were not serious, they burned with salt water and stood as raw reminders of how close he had come to disaster. The board carried deep tooth marks where the predator had clamped down with crushing force. Later, marine experts explained that tiger sharks often reacted to unusual splashing or movement near the surface, investigating by striking at objects that confused their senses, and that windsurf boards with their bright sails and sharp motions could easily attract attention in waters where these predators roamed, leaving even the most skilled riders vulnerable to sudden attacks born not of hunger, but of raw curiosity. For Jake, the experience was more than a lesson in risk. It was a confrontation with the truth that the ocean belonged not to him, but to the predators that had ruled it for millions of years. And as he looked at the scuffed board and the torn fabric of his wetsuit, he understood that his survival had come not from control or skill alone, but from chance, and that the striped shadow of the tiger shark would always remain in his memory as the moment when the thrill of the sea nearly became his end. The Gulf of Mexico stretched out beneath the faint glow of dawn on May 6, 2016, its surface calm and its waters carrying the dark weight of the deep, while the lights of an offshore oil platform glimmered in the half-light like a floating island of steel. On the outer edge of that massive structure, rig worker Daniel Ortiz moved with the steady rhythm of someone long accustomed to the dangerous routine of life at sea, performing early maintenance tasks before the heat of the day. His harness clipped for safety as he leaned out over the open water to check the anchors and lines that secured the platform's equipment. Daniel had worked on the rigs for years, a man in his early 30s with the strength and calm focus that came from long shifts in a world where the sea tested every movement. And though fatigue weighed on his shoulders, he trusted his body and his experience to carry him through another morning. The air smelled of salt and metal, and the only sounds were the hum of machinery, the call of distant seabirds, and the muted crash of waves against the supports below, giving the moment a sense of calm that felt almost too still. But in the murk beneath the platform, a shadow moved with a different purpose. A 14-foot bull shark that patrolled the shallow offshore waters with the restless energy of a predator known for aggression and unpredictable strikes. Its heavy body gliding close to the steel supports where fish gathered. Its senses alert to the vibrations and noise from above. Drawn toward the movement along the edge, the shark rose slowly at first, circling with deliberate rhythm, its presence hidden by the dark, clouded water. Daniel leaned down farther to inspect a line, stretching his body over the open sea as his gloved hands tugged at the wet rope, unaware of the massive shape rising just beneath him, until the predator surged upward in a burst of speed that seemed out of place for its thick frame, its jaws opening wide to clamp onto his right leg with crushing force. The pain exploded instantly through his body, as the shark's teeth tore through muscle and bone, and his scream echoed across the platform, sharp and ragged, carrying above the sound of the sea. He kicked wildly, his free leg thrashing as his hands clawed for the edge of the rig. But the predator yanked him downward, the weight of its body pulling him off balance and dragging him headfirst into the water with a violent splash that sent ripples across the calm surface. His safety harness tore free under the sudden force, and the men working nearby turned in shock at the noise, their eyes catching only the spray and Daniel's flailing arms before he vanished below, pulled into the murky green by the relentless predator. Underwater, his world dissolved into a storm of bubbles and blood, his chest burning as the shark shook him against the steel supports with brutal efficiency, the impact sending shocks of agony through his frame as the structure around him blurred into streaks of motion. He fought with every ounce of strength, striking at the predator with his fists and trying to wrench himself free. But the shark's jaws held fast, its head jerking side to side with terrifying violence, as though testing the resilience of prey that had no chance of escape. The water filled with red as his struggles weakened, and above, his colleagues rushed to the railing, shouting for help as they grabbed ropes, life rings, and anything they could throw down toward him. Daniel surfaced for a brief instant, his face twisted in agony, blood pouring from his leg as he tried to cry out. But before hands could reach him, the bull shark surged again, its body breaking the water in a violent thrash that sent spray across the steel beams, its jaws clamping onto him once more and dragging him under in a final, devastating attack that silenced his screams and left only a roiling patch of foam and red spreading across the surface. The men on the rig stared in horror, their frantic efforts turning to despair as they realized what had happened. The ocean swallowing their friend and co-worker with terrifying speed. The water around the supports settling only after long moments of chaos. Radios crackled as emergency calls went out, and rescue crews scrambled to respond. But minutes stretched painfully as those above watched the waves with desperate eyes, waiting for any sign that Daniel might still fight his way back. By the time boats arrived with trained responders, the sea had calmed again, carrying only faint streaks of red near the platform's edge, and divers entered the water with grim determination, searching among the beams and shadows where the predator had struck. When they recovered Daniel's body, the extent of his wounds left no doubt that the attack had been fatal within moments, the violence of the shark's strikes leaving him broken beyond any hope of survival. News of the incident spread quickly, shocking those who lived and worked around the Gulf, where men knew the dangers of machinery, storms, and fire, but rarely thought of predators from below as threats in their industrial world of steel and oil. Experts reviewing the attack explained that bull sharks were among the most aggressive species in the world, highly territorial and prone to unpredictable bursts of violence, especially in murky, shallow waters where human activity overlapped with their hunting grounds. They noted that the vibrations of the platform, combined with Daniel's movements and splashes near the edge, may have drawn the shark's attention and triggered the sudden attack, reminding everyone that the sea around the rigs was never free of risk. Even in calm water beneath the rising sun, the offshore environment that seemed so stable and controlled was still a part of the wild, and in that wild, predators answered only to their instincts. For the workers who stood in silence on the platform that morning, the memory would not fade. The sound of his scream and the violent splash etched into their minds, a reminder of how quickly the sea could turn from calm to chaos. And for Daniel Ortiz, whose shift had begun like countless others, the encounter marked the end of a life lived at the boundary between human industry and the raw power of nature, a place where the line between control and vulnerability could vanish in seconds under the strike of an apex predator. The morning sea off the rugged coast of New Zealand lay calm under a pale sun on June 5, 2019. The kind of calm that gave a false sense of safety to those who ventured out onto its surface. Sam, an adventure blogger who had made a life out of chasing thrills and writing about close calls, set out with two of his friends in kayaks, each of them eager to test their luck fishing in waters that had long been known for their beauty, but also for the power that lurked beneath. Their lightweight boats cut smoothly across the glassy water, the paddles dipping rhythmically. And for a while there was nothing but the quiet slap of waves and the soft call of seabirds circling overhead. The men settled into a rhythm, casting their lines and waiting patiently as the kayaks drifted slightly with the current, unaware of what was moving just below them. The deep blue beneath the kayaks held a predator that had been drawn in by the scent of chum and the repeated splashing of lures. A short-fin mako shark, one of the fastest and most unpredictable hunters of the ocean, patrolled the area with sudden bursts of speed, each movement sleek and controlled. At nearly 10 feet in length, the shark was a streamlined missile of muscle and teeth, capable of reaching speeds that made escape nearly impossible once it decided to strike. For several minutes, it circled out of sight, each pass drawing it closer as it responded to the disturbance on the surface with mounting curiosity and predatory focus. Sam leaned slightly over his kayak to adjust his line, unaware that beneath him the shark was already angling upward, its dark shape cutting through the gloom with a sudden surge of force. In an instant, the calm shattered as the mako launched itself toward the surface, its snout slamming into the side of Sam's kayak with explosive violence. The lightweight craft tipped violently, water spraying as Sam was thrown sideways, his body hitting the sea with a cold shock that ripped the air from his lungs. He flailed as he surfaced, gasping. But before he could even orient himself, the shark came again, its jaws snapping within inches of his arm, the teeth grazing him and tearing a jagged hole through the sleeve of his wetsuit. The bite was shallow but enough to draw blood, and the sting of salt water seared the wound as panic tore through his chest. His heart hammered as he kicked hard to keep himself afloat, his movements frantic yet desperate to stay controlled, because he could feel the predator circling back even before he saw the fin break the surface. The shark darted in quick explosive bursts, a blur of muscle and speed that seemed impossible to follow, each pass closer than the last, each snap of its jaws promising that the next one might not miss. Sam splashed and kicked, his legs burning as he tried to keep distance between himself and the hunter, his mind racing with the knowledge that he was completely exposed in open water with nowhere to hide. The shark came in again, its body twisting in the water as it swerved at the last second, its tail thrashing so close that the force of the current rocked his body sideways. Every second dragged, stretched by fear, his chest heaving as he fought to stay calm while the predator studied him with unnerving focus. His friends, still upright in their kayaks, reacted with frantic energy, using their paddles to beat the water's surface, trying to create noise and distraction, their boats rocking with the effort. Sam could hear the splashes around him and felt a flicker of hope. But the shark was not ready to give up. It circled again, cutting through the water just below him, and for one terrible moment he thought he saw the pale underside of its body turning, as if readying to come straight up at him. His lungs ached from the cold and the effort, his arms heavy from treading. Yet he forced himself to keep his movements sharp and deliberate, because he knew thrashing wildly would only invite another strike. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the mako pulled away. Its sleek body slid back into the deeper water, the flashes of silver fading into the darkness below. Sam treaded water for several moments longer, every nerve on fire, half expecting it to return until his friends maneuvered their kayaks close enough to steady him as he pulled himself shaking back onto his boat. His wetsuit hung in tatters around his arm, blood mixing with seawater as it dripped into the kayak, the shallow cuts burning but not severe enough to threaten his life. The adrenaline made his body tremble, his breath still short and sharp as the three men sat in silence, the calm sea now carrying a weight it had not held before. Later, when the story reached the surface world, experts explained that the shortfin mako is among the fastest sharks on the planet, a predator capable of explosive attacks and unpredictable movements that often make it one of the most dangerous sharks to encounter at sea. While not known for targeting humans as prey, their powerful bursts of curiosity and aggression can make even a simple fishing trip into a fight for survival. For Sam, The encounter became more than a story to share with his readers. It was a reminder of how fragile safety truly is in the wild, and how the difference between life and death in the ocean could be decided in the space of a heartbeat. The southern coast of Australia stretched wide beneath the morning sun on January 11, 2015, the sea shimmering with a calm surface that seemed endless, broken only by the occasional movement of seabirds as they skimmed across the water. The Vargas family had set out on a luxury yacht that morning, their excitement high as the bow cut cleanly through the waves, the craft steady and gleaming against the bright horizon. Carlos and Elena Vargas had brought their 4 children, Sofia, Mateo, Isabella, and Luis, for a long-awaited trip, and with them came Captain James Holden, an experienced sailor who knew these waters well and had guided many families along this stretch of coast. Everything felt safe and peaceful, the sun warming the deck, the air filled with the salty scent of the open ocean, and laughter echoing across the surface as the family relaxed together, unaware of what swam below. Beneath the calm, a predator patrolled in silence, drawn to the area by the seal colonies that thrived along the rocky shoreline. The great white shark measured close to 20 feet, its body immense, its movement steady and deliberate as it cruised beneath the surface. For hours it had moved in wide arcs, conserving its energy, watching and waiting, its senses tuned to the smallest vibrations. The sound of the yacht's engines, the shifting of water against the hull, and the irregular splashing from the deck drifted downward, catching its attention. With the curiosity and aggression that often drove apex predators to investigate, the shark angled closer, drawn not only by the noise but also by instinct, a deep drive that pushed it to test anything that entered its territory. On the surface, the Vargas family carried on, unaware that the calm beauty around them was a fragile cover. The children leaned over the rails, watching the endless blue, pointing out seabirds and tossing small objects into the waves, while Carlos checked fishing gear stored on the deck. Captain Holden stood at the helm, scanning the horizon with the experienced eye of a man who had seen sudden storms and shifting currents, though even he could not see what approached from below. The first strike came without warning. The great white drove upward with immense power, its head slamming against the yacht's hull in a thunderous crash that shook the vessel from bow to stern. The sudden violence threw chaos into the cabin as the boat rocked hard to one side, sending objects flying and people tumbling to the floor. The sound of shattering glass and groaning metal filled the air as the family struggled to regain balance, panic rising as the realization struck that something enormous had rammed them from below. In the confusion, the children lost their footing and slid across the deck, water rushing over the sides as the vessel tilted sharply. Luis, Sofia, and Isabella were thrown into the sea, their small bodies splashing down into the cold water, followed quickly by Mateo, who tried to grab the rail but slipped as the yacht lurched again. Elena scrambled toward the side, but the force of the rocking hull sent her tumbling after them, while Carlos lunged to reach his wife and children, only to lose his balance and fall in as well. Within seconds, the entire family was in the water, thrashing and shouting as the sea swallowed them up, their bright clothes stark against the blue waves. Captain Holden gripped the wheel tightly, his body braced as the vessel rocked under the strain of the impact. His mind raced as he tried to steady the craft, but his eyes fell to the water where the Vargas family now struggled. He saw the unmistakable shadow circling just below them, a dark shape moving with terrifying purpose. As the predator assessed the scene it had created, the shark's fin cut through the surface for a moment before vanishing again, its body gliding in wide, controlled arcs around the flailing swimmers. The minutes that followed stretched unbearably long, each second heavy with the possibility of disaster. The great white came close, circling tighter, its massive body brushing the surface, its dorsal fin slicing the water with silent menace. The children splashed wildly, their movements frantic and uncoordinated, while Carlos and Elena tried desperately to keep them together, the family clinging to one another as they kicked and fought to stay afloat. The water around them churned with fear and movement, the exact signals that often triggered the shark's explosive strikes. Holden acted quickly, throwing ropes and flotation devices into the water while using the yacht's remaining power to shift its position closer, all the while keeping his eyes locked on the predator. The shark suddenly turned sharply, charging toward the cluster of swimmers with terrifying speed, its head breaking the surface for an instant as it closed the distance, only to veer away at the last moment, its tail slapping the water with violent force that drenched the family and rocked them apart. The strike was a warning, a display of control that could have easily become fatal had the animal chosen to commit. For several more minutes, the circling continued, each pass bringing the shark closer, each moment threatening to turn the ocean red. Yet Holden's relentless efforts to maneuver the yacht between the predator and the swimmers created enough disturbance to confuse and frustrate the animal. The roar of the engines, the slamming of the hull against the waves, and the splashing of thrown equipment built into a wall of distraction, until at last the shark turned away. Its immense body slid beneath the surface one final time, retreating into the depths with the same silent purpose that had brought it there. The family, battered and gasping, was hauled back onto the damaged vessel, their bodies marked with bruises, scrapes, and shallow cuts from the fall and the frantic struggle in the water. When news of the event spread, experts explained that great white sharks were known to ram vessels when curiosity or territorial instincts took hold, especially near hunting grounds rich with seals. They warned that even the most experienced crews could not always predict or prevent such encounters. For the Vargas family, the trip meant to be a carefree escape had turned into a harrowing reminder of the raw power that ruled the ocean, a memory that would follow them long after the scars of that morning faded.